On this episode of the show, I have with me Shahryar Quadri. He is the CTO of OneImaging, and we're going to be talking about, well, the healthcare system, how we should keep technology within the mix, and how do we not lose that human touch. And there's a lot of optimization in the middle there that kind of impacts the patient, the healthcare provider, the system itself, and Shahryar is going to kind of walk us through where all those intersections kind of meet. It's a good one. I think a lot of people will be interested in this, but thanks for taking the time to do this with us.
Oh, thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. I guess OneImaging, what do you guys do before we dive in?
Yeah, absolutely. So OneImaging is a company in the radiology benefit space. Very simply put, what we do is we connect our members who are basically working for large employers, and we connect them to our national network of imaging centers to ultimately get them access to affordable and transparent imaging care. And at the end of the day, the net benefit of our service is that our members end up receiving white glove experience when it gets to booking their imaging appointments, and we're able to save our employer customers up to 60% on their imaging costs.
Okay. All right. So obviously we're talking about cost optimization. We're talking about healthcare. Everyone still wants that human touch, so we got a lot of ground in front of us. I guess when we're looking at where healthcare is and where technology sits within that intersection, for me personally, I can't speak for everyone, I'm okay seeing technology more involved. I like the updates, more of the interaction and being able to message a doctor. I don't mind not you losing some of that person, but I know a lot of people when it comes to the medical and healthcare side of things, they want that human touch. They want to make sure that that's still something that is the way it's been. I guess talk to us a little bit about the human touch, and when it comes to healthcare, it seems like the healthcare system wants to slightly optimize by moving away with more touch points, but are people ready for that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think, really part of it is when it comes to healthcare, nothing is more personal, right? And, when you are, at risk for a certain type of a condition or a loved one is, you can use Dr. Google all day long, but at the end of the day, you're going to go to a doctor and see what that doctor is going to recommend out to you. At least I think in my lifetime, I don't think that's going to change right now. The tools that we have available to us can absolutely inform us, give us good recommendations. But ultimately, when it comes down to it, that human touch, at least the caregiver aspect of it, there's just something innately human about that I don't think is going to change. I think, specifically when it comes to how technology is going to be leveraged, I think it becomes more of a capacity game, right? Like, how do we leverage AI? How do we leverage technology to be able to go increase the capacity ultimately to let the caregivers ultimately be more human, to be able to go have that human-to-human interaction?
Absolutely. And, I guess when we think about healthcare, obviously it's expensive. I don't think that's been talked to death, so we don't need to talk about that necessarily. But when we look at ways that healthcare can be optimized with technology, right? Reducing costs with technology, but still keeping that quality, the end user still having that touch point with the healthcare provider, with the way it's been. I guess is that balance? Are we still able to keep that balance in terms of optimizing costs and keeping that relationship, or is there always a little bit of push-pull there?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because, maybe even before we get into it, like when we define, like, what does it mean to optimize healthcare cost, right? And I think when I initially think about it, it's like, oh, okay, how do I save money, on my healthcare? One of the things that I've discovered, my career has primarily been in healthcare technology, specifically in the space of being able to go help patients save money. Oftentimes what ends up happening is that when you say, like, I'm optimizing cost or I'm saving money, like, cheap equals, sometimes not good, right? Or, not necessarily the best service. And I think, to a certain degree, and again, in my experience, you almost have to go bifurcate, what that cost optimization looks like. I think one is, what aspects of healthcare could you consider a commodity where it might not matter, what the cost is. And medications, kind of like jumps to my mind there, right? So you see a lot of companies, especially recently, like, cost plus drugs, things like that, GoodRx, where you effectively have cash pay. And one of the reasons why those companies have really gotten popular is because at the end of the day, medication is a commodity, right? Whether I pick it up from Cost Plus Drugs or Costco or, wherever, mail order, it doesn't really matter, right? So people are less sensitive to the actual service component. Now, when you take a look at it, from a medical procedure perspective, so for example, at OneImaging, we are very much, not just taking having our members go in and get imaging procedures, but there's also like a read component. There's the ability for you to be able to go trust what the radiologist is actually saying. There's a service aspect of that, where at the end of the day, you don't want to necessarily think about, am I optimizing cost on the radiologist? And so in that world, so outside of the commodity side, I think ultimately where it comes to the service, the thinking shouldn't necessarily be how do I spend less on that radiologist, but ultimately how do we leverage technology to be able to go waste less human time? How do we ultimately increase trust through this particular component? And that's why I very much feel as though kind of like, especially when it comes to the services side of things, we very much have to be able to go treat it to a level of optimization on capacity planning, right? So when I am sitting and talking with that radiologist, yes, I might receive that radiology report. Is there technology out there? Can I go upload my report into ChatGPT, have it summarized for me, and then, based kind of maybe perhaps on some of those outputs, I can have a more informed conversation with my radiologist, things like that. And as a result, you're going to start seeing that, both the trust between the patient and the provider will increase over a period of time. And I think that's really the direction that we're heading.
Absolutely. That's really interesting. I guess when you're looking at, we talked about capacity, obviously there's not enough doctors, right? I mean, when we're looking at what technology can do for healthcare and part of this cost optimization, are we really optimizing provider time? I mean, obviously that's one component of it, but if we can help a radiologist, double their throughput, we see twice as many, we get the results faster, doctors can action faster, the whole supply chain seems like it would speed up, which I don't know if it reduces costs, but certainly will optimize the healthcare potentially.
Absolutely. Really, I think a good framework to think about is, first off, let's start with efficiency. Kind of like in our space as well, a key component of what we do at OneImaging is help our members book appointments at, different imaging centers. Now, when you take a look at the actual workflow that's happening behind the scenes, Amir, it's still back in like 1998. We're still receiving faxes, from an order perspective to be able to go pick up, figure out how to be able to go get that into the system, and then ultimately making phone calls out to, in certain cases to imaging centers, because a lot of those aren't necessarily connected to automated systems in which you're able to go read the actual availability on imaging centers. Right? And so it very much almost kind of becomes, I think to the point that you're making, a supply and demand type of a situation, right? Are we really optimizing the availability, the actual supply, in this case, whether it's imaging centers, whether it's radiologists, with the actual demand that's coming in, which is ultimately the orders? And I think a big part of the reason why it isn't being optimized right now is honestly it's just the evolution of the way the technology has proliferated within healthcare, right? I think a big part of it is just number one, like, are there any incentives for us to be able to go, for a provider or an imaging center to be able to go upgrade, to go get automated? And I think over a period of time, again, just like everything else that happens in technology, like the change itself is introduced, and then over a period of time, you've got you have companies that are ultimately forced to be able to adopt to that technology. Otherwise, they're not going to be able to go survive. A great example of this is a company like ZocDoc that's kind of out there, right? Where previous to ZocDoc, it was very rare for you to be able to go out and schedule a appointment, kind of like on your own without physically picking up the phone call. Now there's still some work to be done kind of in the radiology space, but the point being is that now when you're able to go start exposing what the schedules end up looking like, you have the ability to do a little bit more self-service. And I think, again, as technology is evolving over a period of time, it is our expectation as users to almost, have like real-time information when it comes to being able to go pick up the phone and actually have them, make a phone call. I think, you're in my generation, I think we're still okay with that. Take a look at our kids, right? They don't want to talk on the phone, right? They want to have everything accessible immediately. Well, in order for you to be able to do simple things like that, you have to have systems that are able to go be interoperable, right? To be able to go give the scheduling, availability. And if you, let's say, do have, folks that are at the imaging center at the front desk, like how can they help optimize? How can we optimize their time to be able to go do that? And so, I think the reality here is that within the next, 2 to 3 years, this is going to become digitized, right? It's just one of those systems that are inevitable. And I think a big part of it, very much has to do with the way that, whether it's retail like Amazon, whether it's, ride sharing, like Uber, for example, we're just getting so used to this kind of like instant access. I think it's just a matter of time before it comes over into healthcare as well.
That's really interesting. And I guess, when we're talking about technology and healthcare has been laggards. I mean, I think in the last 10 years, it's really accelerated. You can see the shift. I mean, systems have changed. There's a lot of automation, at least in the back office. When we're looking at technology and the optimization, the cost optimization, and keeping quality, I guess, at a high level, the back office does seem like it's the easier place to focus on. When we're talking about the provider themselves, we're talking about radiologists in this case getting assistance, or other doctors. We see the doctors. I go into an office now and you see somebody walking around, with the notes. I've seen the glasses. I've seen, again, all these different technologies that come into play. From the healthcare provider's perspective, I guess for them, they have done something a certain way. They have gone to school to learn to do things a certain way. When it comes to change management and getting their adoption, are there things that you've seen work to help them get on board, to see the value of some of the tech that's coming out or is out for them?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So yeah, it's a fantastic point around kind of like the back office, or, the way that I like to kind of think about it is oftentimes the administrative burden side of things, right? So, you take a look at a provider office, you've got the front desk, what are they doing all day, right? They're scheduling, they're checking eligibility, as Amir is coming in, okay, does he have valid insurance? Are we in network, out of network? Is there, something we need to do on that side? The procedure, that's going to happen. Is there a prior authorization, that we need to go get for it? And so these are all, like those administrative tasks that I think very much the, technology can solve that, right? Meaning to say, do we need to actually have a human picking up the phone call or, talking to the insurance companies? And there's a lot of movement on that side. To the point that you're making kind of around, well, how do you drive a physician adoption at the end of the day? Right. I think that's a little bit more difficult, and to be very honest, I think it's a little outside of my own, professional skill set. But at least what I have seen here specifically is the ability for us to be able to go leverage technology to really predict and prevent, future events from happening that perhaps the physician hasn't been able to kind of like take a look at. And I'll use an example. Like many years ago, I took one of those. It was a blood test ultimately to be able to go see whether or not my genetic makeup has any reaction to like medications, for example, right? So, if I'm, let's say, on a statin, for instance, right, does my metabolic makeup, make me less susceptible for perhaps taking a certain type of a medication class or whatever. So anyway, I ended up running through it was like a $300 test at the time, whatever, gave me a really thick report. And next time I went to my physician, I was like, hey, I had this test done. I kind of gave it to him. My physician was awesome, don't get me wrong. Just took a look at it like 2 seconds and kind of handed it back. Didn't really know what to do with it, right? And so I think, for me, the aha moment there is that it's not that, he didn't care. He absolutely cares, and he's taken very, very good care of me. But it's just that, at the end of the day, he has a certain amount of time kind of allocated. And what makes it to his radar, right? What does he need to be able to go kind of like talk to me about? At the end of the day, he just took a look at my stats, saw that, the medication that I was on, that I was doing a good job. The blood test results were looking fine. Okay, we're kind of good to go. I think what ends up happening over a period of time is, as these tools and technologies become more prevalent, to be able to go take these type of reports and actually do something with them. And, whether they have the ability to be able to go kind of update my chart, for example, like being able to go post it into the record. Effectively, you're going to have these type of technologies that are going to be able to go predict and eventually prevent, larger episodes that are going to start occurring. Kind of in my experience, actually, I've seen two companies that I'm super excited about. One is a company called Biograph, and what they do is they run a full set of like comprehensive tests, as well as scans, like full body scans, where they're able to go, kind of do like a baseline, if you will, right? And so if you kind of like think about it, when you go in for your annual physical, right, you're usually asked a few questions, get a blood test done, and it's all good to go. But I think over a period of time, what's going to end up happening is that as these full body scans become a lot more accessible to folks, you are now able to go see kind of like a baseline. And as you have systems, not unlike what OneImaging is developing now, being able to go analyze what your baseline looks from one year over to another. Now, not only are you receiving the care kind of like on the external side, blood tests, whatever else the case might be, but you can now start seeing the deltas between one year and another. And, when you do have platforms that are going to be able to go allow you to do the kind of like the deltas between one year and another, now all of a sudden you're having that much more of an informed discussion. And when this information is also posted into your record directly as well, your physician knows this as well. And I think that's the future of healthcare, over a period of time where, the AI, whether it's AI, whether it's other really novel solutions that are kind of out there, ultimately we're going to start receiving a lot more data on us as individuals, and it becomes very, very personalized. And really the ability for us to be able to go use technology to go speed it up, right? And I think, again, as you take a look at a lot of the LLMs that are kind of out there, they're fantastic about being able to go scan large documents, right? Being able to go identify, okay, well, what should I be talking to my doctor about? What should I be able to kind of like bring to the forefront? And, when you take a look at it on the physician side, they're human as well, and they're running into the same problems. If you have information overload, what do you need to be able to go prioritize? And ultimately, how are you able to go optimize that care? So that's, I think, the super exciting part about it. And I think over time, that's potentially, one of the ways that this is going to be, the physicians are ultimately going to drive adoption of a lot of these technologies.
That's actually fantastic. And, when we're thinking about some of these technologies, obviously right now, LLMs and Gen AI and the impact on healthcare is one of the biggest talking points. And I guess from certain perspectives, those sound good, right? I think there is a future there. Something like radiology, I mean, I don't know the stats off the top of my head, but there's already solutions that help, radiologists read the film better, and maybe not AI. And I guess when it comes to what you see in healthcare, this interest in Gen AI, this interest in what these large language models can do, where does that sit within where we're at within healthcare tech? Is it the case where we've gotten a lot of the tech to work as it is, and the next step in the next evolution is to have it become generative and actually learn? Or, is that still some things to be worked out to get to that point? I mean, that's a big question, obviously. I mean, more of a generalization.
No, but it's a very relevant question. There's a couple of ways to be able to go tackle it, right? So number one, I think one of the biggest things, so specifically within radiology, I think, of all the fields of medicine, I think radiology and the application of AI, especially when it comes to image recognition and, a lot of the AI models that have been created, I think radiology is probably the furthest along, or one of the furthest along, kind of like within the field, because at the end of the day, the algorithms that are getting developed are basically, you're looking at, these DICOM images and able to go kind of extrapolate data. That's actually almost a perfect use case. I think, Amir, the bigger issue here isn't necessarily that are the models out there, or do we still need to be able to go develop? Like, yes, they will continually develop and get better and better. They do exist. The biggest problem, in my opinion, is data access, right? Specifically, when it comes to imaging, being able to go get access to your image, and the format itself is actually called DICOM. The ability for you to be able to go receive it directly out of the PAC system or the imaging center is sometimes super painful, right? And oftentimes, unfortunately, in my own personal life, I've had to go have several of these done. And when I requested these actual images, if you can imagine it, they printed out on CD-ROM drives. Who has CD-ROM drives anymore? But, the point being here is that, you ultimately have like DICOM images, or like a series of images that are multiple gigabytes. And so they need to be able to go post that in. So that's great. Okay, fantastic. I have the CD-ROM drive. I just read, that Microsoft just released a new AI algorithm on being able to go read radiology images and potentially identify certain type of conditions. Okay, that's great. How do I get that deployed on my system, right? And that's where the disconnect is occurring, right? Companies are doing fantastic, extraordinary work out there to be able to go develop super advanced algorithms. And oftentimes these algorithms are actually deployed directly into the, whether it's the imaging software, of the MRI, CT machines, things like that. But, the barrier to entry here is that it's actually not accessible, or it's not easily accessible, to end users like you and I. And so that, I think, is the bigger issue here, is that, over time, as data becomes a little bit more interoperable, right? Is there a way for me to be able to go capture my, my MRIs, my CT scans kind of locally, or on the OneImaging website, for example, and then, similar to like Hugging Face, right? Oh, I see there's a new model that was deployed, to be able to go do XYZ. Can I very easily just deploy it on top of my own images, keeping it kind of like in a secured profile? So that doesn't exist today, but these are just some of the challenges that we're working to tackle at OneImaging.
That's really interesting. And I think, as a CTO, and I like to ask this question because there hasn't been that many times, at least I can remember, in the last maybe 20, 25 years, where technology iterates so quickly that if you make a decision today or next week, things could have shifted so much that, and it's not just, the models shifted. I mean, the models themselves started incorporating features and functionality that potentially eliminate something you might have been thinking about. I guess as a CTO, do you spend much time worrying about the impact to your roadmap, or is it a case where, listen, there's a lot of fast moving parts in this iteration of technology, you can't control that anyways. It is a bit out of your control, but how do you deal with just the speed right now?
Yeah, no, it's, honestly, I don't worry about it at all. And I think it's not only inevitable, but like if you don't embrace the change and if you don't embrace how fast it's moving, then you're just going to be left behind, right? I think that's probably number one. For me, I'm giddy every single day, like just seeing the advancements. I mean, even now with Gemini 3 coming in and reading about, Nano Banana and like all the crazy, things that it itself is able to go do. I think honestly, the biggest thing that I worry about is like all these advancements are happening that I'm myself am not, keeping up to date on. And, how do I apply that, not just professionally, but then also personally as well? It's super exciting. So I don't think, we can get to that point where you worry about how quickly the technology itself is moving, because that's just inevitable. And, believe it or not, it's going to move even faster than what it's been moving at today. And that's the other thing that people don't, oftentimes talk about, is like these LLM models are the worst that they'll ever be today, right? They're only going to get better and better and better. And, ultimately for us, like how do we not only embrace that change, but how do you make that core part of what we're able to go do? I mean, even at OneImaging, for example, this is a big discussion that we've been having just around, code quality, code reviews, how are we able to go efficiently utilize the technology to be able to go move faster and faster kind of on our side. And it just, very quickly goes from, okay, this is just another tool to like, okay, this is becoming like the core tool to, okay, this is going to be the primary way we do pull requests and, code reviews. And ultimately, like, what is the expectation of an architect going to be, to be able to kind of provide feedback, or are they just babysitting the system over a period of time? The answer is, Mira, I don't know. But I think that's also one of the reasons why you have good people, at the team, because they're the ones that are able to not only see the outputs that are occurring, but then how do you move even faster? But it's at the same time, it's also a super exciting time.
Yeah, it's interesting because when we saw the shift to the cloud, when we saw mobile devices, when we saw social media and the consumer apps shift their UI, there's been trends, like there's been things we've seen. This is something different because the speed of development is in the hands of a few, which is okay. I mean, that's fine. People are going to place their R&D into those buckets, and then you have everyone else who's not reacting, but semi-reacting. I don't know if there's a better term. Maybe it's not semi. It's reacting to a degree. And I think what's maybe interesting in where you're at, because I looked at the company, I looked at what you're doing, your background. Of all the places, and you kind of alluded to this, where technology and healthcare might move the needle in a way where consumers don't have that worry about necessarily privacy. They don't feel like technology is encroaching on them. Imaging is something we all, I've gotten the CD and I've been like, what do you want me to do with this, man? I have like 20 of them in a drawer still from MRIs. I don't know why I keep them. But also, when they give you the files and you try to understand them, you have no clue. until you go take them to an expert to read them. I mean, there's so much murkiness. It's one of those areas where it's already so complicated for us as lay people to understand that we're like, hey, if someone can fix this and slightly make it readable for anyone else in the process, we'll all take it. I think it's a very interesting space you guys are in.
And not only that, but take it one step further, right? There is so much information on those images, so much dense information about you as an individual, that's just sitting in your drawer. What are we doing with that? Nothing, And it kind of reminds me, like many years ago, maybe 10, 15, 20 years ago, I think Larry Page made a comment, they were talking about Google and kind of like its place specifically within the medical record space, because I think Microsoft did a Health Vault and Google did Google Health kind of like for a while. And he made a really, profound kind of like statement, which, I mean, it's still stuck with me today. And he said that, as we're starting to go shoebox a lot of these records, like how many people have died because of that? And that was a very valid point, right? HIPAA is very important, don't get me wrong, right? Like HIPAA is absolutely needed to be able to go protect your privacy. I think the way that companies like Apple have taken their approach to health, actually one of my favorite apps is Apple Health, and the way that you're able to go pull in records to your local device, keep it safe and secure, I think is definitely the way to go, right? But also at the same time, great, that's information that I've been able to go import directly from, all of my EMRs, all my different visits, LabCorp, Quest, whatever, it's all sitting on my phone. But am I doing anything proactive with it, right? Is there an algorithm that's running there in the background? Like every time I ingest a new, like a blood record from like LabCorp or whatever else, like, is there something that, is actually reading it to be able to go tell me what I need to be aware of? The answer is no. And I think this is going to definitely become one of those problems that gets solved within the next decade, where we have all of this archival information. Like if you've ever downloaded information onto Apple Health, like I think I've got data from all the way back to like 2005 on my phone right now, but it's just sitting there in a silo. There's no proactive algorithm that's taking a look, being able to make recommendations out to me. And oftentimes the interesting part too is that when you take a look at the way that doctors especially are able to go take a look at your records, they're usually not looking beyond 1 to 2 years. They're just wanting to take a look at, okay, where are you right now? But what are the implications of that, right? Why, if you're not necessarily looking at your full longitudinal record and actually making sense of it, are there ways for us to be potentially, to be able to receive better care because of that? I mean, there might be certain nuanced things in your health that maybe perhaps we aren't catching. The reason for that as well is that, again, physicians just don't have the time to be able to go through that full nuanced record. And honestly, we shouldn't expect our physicians to be able to go do that. Again, they're also only human. Can we develop tools to be able to go proactively look at that? And again, being a participant in the healthcare system as well, one of the biggest things that I've come to realize is that at the end of the day, the patient themselves are their own biggest advocate, right? Is that despite you receiving the best care in the world, right? Like the doctors are going to miss things, right? They might not necessarily, they're treating quite a few patients. And so how do you get it to a level where if you are able to go put together that longitudinal record, have access to all of these images, upload it somewhere, click some sort of a button and say, okay, is there something that I'm missing, right? If you have, images, for example, over multiple years, there's things like bone density that you can actually start measuring. Oh, what's my bone density degradation happening over a period of time? And again, this is all information that, is already on those CD-ROM, on those CDs that you already have. But there's nothing there to be able to go kind of expose that to us. And so anyway, these are the super exciting problems. I think, that will get solved over time. And, I think especially with AI and like just how quickly they're advancing, I think, the exciting part about all of this is that, it's limitless what the applications can be, right? And I think when it comes to you being able to, leverage these models, I think, you made the comment around there's just a handful of folks, that are actually building out the models. We're all kind of reacting to it. I don't think that's a bad thing, right? Because, number one, you do have optionality. You can use, the different models themselves. But also, I think, and this is kind of, this is a pro and a con in the sense that, you do see a lot of AI company startups that are out there, right? But in reality, are they just wrappers around ChatGPT or OpenAI or whatever else the case might be, or Grok or whatever else the case might be? But really the concept is that, okay, the actual application that you're building, you're not necessarily an AI company, but you are leveraging AI to be able to go solve a particular problem, right? And so that's, I think, where you're going to start seeing some really great advancements where, like, for example, for us being in the radiology space, helping our members book appointments, maximize cost savings for the employers while still providing super high quality on those same images. And also at the same time, utilizing those same rails, having the ability for you to be able to go pull back your actual MRIs into an actual website where you can do things with it. I mean, that's pretty exciting. And I think that's also the future of how healthcare is going to happen across the industry.
That's fantastic. I'm going to ask you maybe one final question. Because you do have an extensive background in healthcare tech, I had someone on within the material and just the general lab space. And the one thing that I understood is that there are so many companies, universities, all running tests to invent new materials, tests in labs of all kinds, and no one shares any data. I mean, there could be 50 labs all running the same data and running into the same exact mistakes, only to go, oh, we need to try something new. You mentioned HIPAA, and I understand why it's there. I mean, it's a complete safeguard for people to have that privacy. But on the flip side, it almost seems like we're missing this grander opportunity. If there was an anonymized database of, I'm 51 now, if I have every 51-year-old male's blood was analyzed with all the healthcare that I get done every time I do a physical, and then we can track that against a larger population, because I don't know if that can be done right now. I can't imagine Quest shares it with another hospital that shares it with, another company that's similar to diagnostics. I know that will never probably happen, or I shouldn't say never, I don't believe in that. It'd be very challenging for me to see that happen based on what we see out there. And you mentioned that with radiology is, if you're studying these images, and the more you can study them across larger amounts of radiology imaging, the more the machine could learn and understand these patterns. And it seems like as humans, we need HIPAA to safeguard our privacy, but we're also missing something that could help us as a society catch things sooner, improve our healthcare. I don't know. That's a loaded question.
Yeah. No, that's I mean, I think of that often. And, I remember reading something around the lines of exactly this conversation that we're having and the approach that China has to it, where actually China doesn't necessarily have a lot of those laws, right? And so when they are starting to go build out their models, the data set that they have for their full population is much greater than probably any, what any company in the United States has. And, when you take a look at the models that are getting developed as a result of that, there is a competitive edge, that'll happen, that'll be built kind of like for those models. I don't think we're going to solve anything, kind of like on our side. And, here in the U.S., I think the model that we have is very much, number one, we have HIPAA, so you wouldn't be able to have Quest share, even if it was anonymized. And maybe it is. That might be a little bit outside of my scope. I'm not exactly sure. I know there are companies like Datavant, that are kind of out there that, do share, some data. Now, like what the scope of that data is, whether you're able to go self-select into it, what the monetization ends up looking like, over a period of time. I think, that's definitely going to be something that we need to take a look at. But part of it is also, when it comes to being able to take a look at, the actual the ability for you to be able to go create the test data. And I remember, again, about a year or so ago, I was reading about this company that was kind of in the clinical drug trials business. And basically the way that they were kind of like creating their company was they were basically saying that, whenever you do clinical trials and you take a look at the efficacy of a certain type of a medication, you have to run physical trials, right? They were actually building a model where, the model itself, instead of running physical trials, they were actually, getting very, very close to being able to go emulate, hey, what it would look like, in a physical, but actually simulating a lot of that data, right? And so I think there's definitely going to be, some work kind of there where when it comes to being able to go, train the models themselves, like how much of it can you actually kind of fake through simulation? and actually get to that same result. And again, it's super exciting. I don't know the answer to that. And I think one of the interesting things, I forget exactly the company it was, but they were mentioning the way that they were making their money was by saying that, okay, if you're spending, $200 million on a drug trial, we will only charge you $50 million because you're still going to get to the end result, kind of like at that same time. And so there are really creative ways where you can get around that. But, I think, again, at the end of the day, right, if there was some sort of a low barrier entryway for you and I to be able to go share our own data sets, fully anonymized, perhaps to some sort of a national database, that any model, anybody worldwide would be able to go leverage, I would 100% do that. Except, that doesn't exist today, and we'd have to go take a look at, you prevent people from being able to go take that and monetizing it in a way that perhaps they're not allowed to. So there's lots of issues that come across, but very, very valid point.
That's fantastic. I think we could probably do this for a while because you have a lot of good insights and thoughts on all these things that have gone through my mind, but I got to let you get back to it. If somebody does have a follow-up question, they want to learn more, we obviously covered a lot of territory here. Is there a good way of reaching out and getting information?
Yeah, absolutely. Please reach out to me directly on LinkedIn. I'd be happy to get in touch.
Okay. Sorry, I appreciate it, man. Thank you for the time.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it. Bye.
Absolutely. All right. That's it for the episode. Be back again, different guest, different topic. Until then, two things. One, obviously we covered a lot of ground with healthcare, technology within healthcare, cost optimization, what that means, where technology kind of sits within the spectrum of various different companies, what we're optimizing for. I mean, we did cover a lot of ground. We threw some hypotheticals in there for you as well. So please share this episode with somebody that also might find it of interest. Also, please like, subscribe, comment. Let me know how the show's going for you. Until next time, thank you and goodbye.